Hello, D. Are you there? Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I was joined for a moment here by my friend, Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, but she seems to be having a little bit of technical difficulty. I expect she will be back when she solves the technical difficulty. However, this is Empowering Democracy, and our topics for tonight are the diversity of Putin's retaliation options, also inside the ceasefire, in Lebanon, the actions of Putin in rewiring Greek myth, and finally, Fahrenheit 7232, which is the temperature at which it's the temperature which the Oreshnik is heated to when it impacts. We'll talk about that in more detail. Hello, Dee.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine.
Oh, yeah.
I was getting a little static from your end before.
Oh, okay. Yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, because I ran up and went to the bathroom and I came back and I came back in. Yeah, Biden issued a statement today, the Biden administration, acting like they have no involvement. It's a complete lie. I put it in the chat.
Acting like they have no involvement in what?
In Syria, what's going on. And that group that they're paying, their proxy group, whatever, they're acting like, oh, they're a dangerous terrorist group. And like they're kind of and they're presenting it as if it's a civil war, and they're closely monitoring it.
Oh, I see. It's a civil war. They're monitoring closely, but they're paying one side, in the civil war. But Biden is denying that. But everybody knows the CIA has been supporting them for years.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. That's exactly what it is. And I put liar, pants on fire. You put it on my timeline on Facebook. Liar, pants on fire, and I put it down there.
Yes.
I mean, everybody knows it's a lie.
That is very appropriate. Hello, Lana. Hey, I see Lana's here. Hello, nice to see you. Which of the articles would you like to start
with? It doesn't matter.
I'm sorry, say it again.
Oh, whichever one you want to start with, I'm fine.
Okay. Would you like to start with the first article, Putin's, let's see. The name of it is Putin announces retaliation strikes against Americans, French, and targets. Oreshnik say for a rainy day. And the article.
After the first one, yeah.
Okay. So I will share that for you, unless you want to share it for yourself.
You can put it up and share it in the room. And I'll read it from there.
Okay, we'll do.
Oh, Colby. Colby's crying.
Oh, well, why is Colby crying?
I don't know.
He's such a big boy. How come he cries all the time?
He's so sensitive. Maybe he's got something that gives him an aim.
That could be.
He's so sensitive, and the girls they just argue with you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Putin announces retaliation strikes against Americans, French, and electric grid targets. Oreshnik saved for a rainy day.
Okay. Oh, look, there's an umbrella.
A rainy day, saved for an umbrella. Yeah, red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
In remarks to Russian journalists on Thursday evening, President Vladimir Putin confirmed that missile and drone strikes against the Ukraine's military infrastructure and the electricity grid carried out on Thursday and also earlier in the week are the retaliation the Defense Ministry foreshadowed for the November 23rd 25th ATACMS strike on Kursk. Detailed targets and damage reports by Russian military bloggers published between noon and 1300 Moscow time, that's 1 o'clock, indicates that strikes by Caliber and KH-101 missiles, drones, and other weapons hit targets across the country's electricity system, including the western region of Rivne, Khmelnytsky, Volyn, and Vinnytsia. Power blackouts in the Ukraine were reported to be widespread from the line of combat in the east to the Polish border in the west, with up to 11 hours of power outage in Kyiv, where the temperature has dropped below freezing. That's horrible.
That's rough.
President Putin followed in remarks to Russian reporters at the conclusion of his two-day meeting in Astana, Kazakhstan, in a session posted by the Kremlin at 17:15, asked several questions about the use of the Oreshnik missile in Russian retaliation for the ATACMS strikes on Kursk on November 23rd and 25th. Putin quipped that it is being saved for a rainy day. Yep. It would be futile to target a minor objective with a hypersonic missile. That's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. However, we will utilize our entire arsenal against significant targets. As I have previously mentioned, we do not rule out the combat employment of Oreshnik on military industrial facilities or command centers, including those in Kyiv. The earlier ATACMS attacks, Putin said, quote, received a response today. Our armed forces have been executing retaliatory strikes over the past couple of days. Today, there was a comprehensive operation. 90 missiles were deployed alongside 100 unmanned strike vehicles. 17 targets within Ukraine were struck, encompassing military, industrial, and auxiliary facilities which support the armed forces and industrial defense enterprises. I wish to reiterate once more, we will certainly respond to such acts of aggression against the Russian Federation. The timing, methods, and weapons employed will be determined by the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense, as each target necessitates a specific approach and appropriate weaponry.
Okay, so let's stop for a minute and comment on this quote from Putin. The people in the West have been expecting that Putin will respond to the ATACMS and the storm shadows, and they're imagining the response is going to be with the Oreshniks. What Putin, is telling us here is that his general staff and he, are going to determine what kinds of retaliatory strikes they are going to make. They won't be pushed into a position where they're going to retaliate at all times with an Oreshnik strike. but the way they're going to retaliate is going to be appropriate to uh, uh, their target. Uh, each target is going to necessitate a specific approach and weaponry appropriate to that particular target. Okay, please go ahead, Dee.
Okay. Okay. Asked again about Oreshnik, quote, do you think these strikes on the Kiev decision-making centers are also possible with the Oreshnik because nothing else seems to be able to get it? Putin replied, nothing else seems to be able to get it. Okay, Putin replied, in Soviet times there was that joke about weather forecast. Quote, the forecast is, everything is possible today during the day. It's possible. The president was followed on Thursday evening, Moscow time, by a detailed defense ministry bulletin announcing, in response to the strikes of the Kiev regime in the depths of the territory of Russia, the armed forces of the Russian Federation during this week carried out strikes on the locations of the systems of long-range Western weapons of the armed forces of Ukraine. Details of the target followed, including U.S. and French military personnel reported killed while directing Ukrainian missile operations in bunkers at Kharkov and Odessa.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's a shame, all
Yes,
these lives lost.
yes, it's a shame, but of course it's perfectly appropriate since they were attacking Russia.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the ones responsible for all this, are sitting, happily in Washington.
Yes, happily in Washington.
Hmm.
Right. Okay, but the poor people who are on the ground
Hmm.
giving data, okay, and advice of various kinds, to the Ukrainians, okay, and determining the nature of the targets, they are bearing the brunt of the defense.
Yeah. Putin also responded to a question about the incoming Trump administration. Quote, if the current President Biden believes that in aggravating the Ukraine war situation, he is increasing the degree of confrontation, creating obstacles for the future administration, it is easy to get out of this situation because the newly elected president will say, quote, it's not me, it's him. I have nothing to do with it. Let's talk. This version is possible that the current administration wants to create additional difficulties for the future. But as far as I understand, the newly elected president, he's still a smart man and already experienced enough. He, with me, it seems that a solution will be found. The U.S. is a great country. Definitely, we are ready for dialogue with the United States, including the future administration.
So there's Putin. He's extending an open hand to the future administration, regardless of what this administration tries to do in the 45 days before it leaves.
Exactly. The Defense Ministry bulletin on Thursday night identified as targets U.S. made ATACMS launchers in the Sumy region and anti ship missiles and their launchers in the Odessa region. Iskander missiles were used in these strikes. The ministry also disclosed that it has targeted U.S. and French military personnel in Kharkov and Odessa. Quote, on 25 November, as a result of a missile strike on the Kraken headquarters of the main intelligence directorate, GURP, in the city of Kharkov, up to 40 foreign specialists, mainly from the United States, were killed. In
Oh,
this in the city of Odessa, an Iskander strike hit the location of a temporary deployment of a unit of the Special Operations Center responsible for combat direction, and control of sea drones, killing 72 personnel, including 9 French instructors and technicians.
Wow.
The Russian strike against the French is also a retaliation against the new French operation in the Black Sea to plan and direct missile and drone attacks against Russian shipping at sea and land targets in the Crimea. For more details, and it has, about a report. Read this Italian report. The Defense Ministry confirmed that the Thursday morning strike hit, quote, the objects, the military-industrial complex of Ukraine, and the energy infrastructure, which ensures their operation. In total, over the week until Thursday, the military report said 100 missiles of various types and 466 Geranium-2 drone had been fired. In Thursday's strike, another 90 missiles and 100 Geranium-2 drones were launched and, quote, hit 17 key objects of the military industry of Ukraine.
Wow.
Wow. The armed forces of the Russian Federation will continue to monitor airfields, assembly areas, and routes for the movement of material for using long-range Western weapons and inflict fire on them. What a map.
Yes. What a map. Yeah, that is quite a map.
A map, yeah. And then a NATO veteran in electrical engineering for combat operations comments on the result of the new electric war raid. Quote, the strikes centered around Riv tells us that substations around the Riv nuclear power plant were targeted. The power outages are widespread. If it's true that cluster munitions were used, it means that various equipment and components have been damaged or destroyed. Note that even if a missile or drone is intercepted above or close to the substations, the debris will cause damage to the gear and potentially there will be fires due to ignition of the oil inside the transformers and breakers. This is significant as the damage is not limited to the transformers and oil circuit breakers. Switchgear, high voltage switches, breakers, and associated protection and control devices are being smashed or reduced to slag. Quote, due to the cumulative impact of multiple electric war strikes, we can bet the Ukrainians are desperately short of spare parts and that the weather is complicating repairs. Zero.
Yeah.
0 degrees, cloudy.
It'll feel -2.
Yeah.
Wind gusts 10 kilometers per hour. I'm sorry, wind gusts 18 kilometers per hour.
Poor air quality.
Yeah. Power shutdown schedules for Kiev detect notice for Friday. And there are the times when they're going to shut down.
The military engineer explains, quote, in Kyiv, a national electric utility, DTEC, is showing 8 to 11 hours in total time of, depending on the zone. Most of the off periods are 4 or 5 hours in duration. In that time, things are going to freeze. What's worse for the Ukrainians is that they'll all be watching the clock, eager to get their heat on, use appliances, chargers, computers, and washroom facilities at the same time as the power comes back on. There will be a tremendous strain on the remaining transformers and generators when that happens. It's certainly that quote, it's a certainty that the electricians have been told to crank up the settings on breakers and other protective devices so they don't trip up due to the surge. This is loaded with risk because if there is an overcurrent or short current fault, the remaining equipment in working condition could be damaged. The gear is quite specialized and complicated in terms of construction. The oil-filled transformers and breakers are certain to be causing powerful fires and secondary explosions that are destroying surrounding electrical infrastructure. Transformer oil burns very hot, which means most of the auxiliary equipment that's protection relies metal enclosed switch gears, bus connections, and switches will be slag. Quote, in terms of the non-nuclear deterrent which the General Staff and the Kremlin have available, the electric war ranks on top. It's the non-nuclear option. The Russian The Russian weaponry does not have to be as technically advanced as the Oreshnik in order to destroy the Ukrainian power grid infrastructure, which in its vertically integrated structure is extremely vulnerable. Truly, there is no way to protect a state from this kind of attack, and recovery will take years. What happens in the meantime? Well, that's the rainy day Putin has just mentioned, and tomorrow the forecast for Kiev is rain.
Unquote.
Unquote. Yes.
This one was republished from Dances with Bears by permission of the author, okay, or a representative. And this again was by John Helmer, and Dances with Bears, I believe, is his blog.
Okay.
I
And this,
thought that piece was very well put
I, I think so too.
and really brought home some of the trouble Ukraine is in right now. Okay, in in terms of the retaliation from Russia, it also makes clear the retaliation from Russia is going to be done on a case by case basis. Okay, it's going to be appropriate. It's not going to be blanket. It's not going to be stupid.
That's the thing too that some have been cautioning that it may not happen here in the U.S. But if the U.S. is poking the bear so much, they said this was a couple of weeks ago. It was talked about with power outages hitting the electric here. That are you prepared to? What would you do if electric is out for a week? Do you have preparations? Like, say, um, I can't think of what it's called. When the power out. Usually, you used to during when there's storms. You'll have it. Oh yeah, the generators.
Yes, you'll
The
have
pa-
right.
the and just having canned goods in your or just something. Just the thing. Most likely it's not going to happen, but just say it did.
Uh, then you have to be ready with alternative electricity.
Hmm.
Okay, if you're going to be able to use any of your home appliances to do things with, to prepare food, and to do the necessary things that you have to do.
Right. And since Biden is so with poking and poking and poking, and they all know the U.S. is involved.
Yes, he shouldn't be poking the bear. We should be dancing with the bear.
Exactly.
It's a lot safer.
Hmm.
So we got 3 comments. Lana says hello all. Evelina says greetings all. And Lana says it seems totally awful to be in this cold without electricity. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
not really totally awful. Okay, but of course, to be expected if you're going to get in a war with another nation, you have to expect there are going to be some power outages along the way. It's just one of the consequences of war.
And that's what I feel so bad for the people in Gaza. In the tents and it's raining and the freezing cold. It's we live in a world where there's no humanity. It's but like you say, where Russia's concerned, yeah, the U.S. is poking and Russia and Ukraine's taking the hit.
Yes, I agree. Okay, the next piece is on the inside the Israel Hezbollah ceasefire. It's a piece from Mondo Weiss. Would you rather read this one, or would you like me to read it?
I could read it.
Okay,
Okay.
go
Okay. Inside the Israel Hezbollah ceasefire. Unpacking the ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Hezbollah and what it means for potential regional war and ongoing genocide in Gaza. And this is Mitchell Plitnick,
ahead.
November 28th.
Who is one of the leading authors that you know at Mondo Weiss?
Hmm.
He consistently does a great job for those who don't know. Okay, go ahead, D.
Yeah, because they call it a ceasefire, but it's really not. You know, one chapter in the long war Israel has waged throughout the Middle East is over. Lebanon and Israel agreed to a ceasefire that went into effect on Wednesday morning. It's been clear for several weeks that Israel and Hezbollah were both
I'm sorry.
okay, were both ready to take a break from the fighting. So, what did the two sides agree to? And I mean, how durable is the agreement? And what does it mean for potential regional war and the ongoing genocide in Gaza? What are the terms of the ceasefire? The text of the ceasefire calls for the fighting between Hezbollah and Israel to stop immediately. Well, Israel hasn't done that. Over the course of the next 60 days, Hezbollah will move all of its personnel and equipment north of the Litani River, some 18 miles from the border with Israel, and Israel's forces will fully withdraw from Lebanon.
If I may say, somehow I don't think that either side is going to comply with this particular bullet point.
No, and the way it was written up, it favors Israel, obviously, over Lebanon.
Right, because if Israel withdraws its forces and Hezbollah moves everything up north of the river, okay, then it's much easier for the Israelis to come back and to fully occupy things with all the Hezbollah forces already gone.
Yeah, and then they have the UNIFIL, the UN, the UNIFIL group, and that's what France and different countries that are French, with Germany, I think France, and different countries that are Israel friendly are going to be there.
Right. So this part of the agreement appears to be unfair to Hezbollah.
Right. Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon will be replaced by the Lebanese military, which will operate alongside the UNIFIL team, which is bogus. It's just like I said, it's a UN team that's Israel friendly, pro Israel.
It's a UN team, but also the Lebanese military is nowhere near as effective, okay, as Hezbollah.
No.
Okay, so if the Israelis decide to come back, I think the resistance from the Lebanese military and the UNIFIL team is going to be very, very weak, and they really won't be in a position to stop them.
No. And reports in the past they talked about when it comes to UNIFIL, they always side with Israel. Whenever complaints are filed,
Yes,
it always benefits Israel.
right. So an interesting question as we've gone, this far into it. I'm sure Mitchell will cover it, but why would Hezbollah agree to this?
Well, it wasn't Hezbollah. From what I understand, it was Lebanon, the Lebanese government.
Right, but you have to have the agreement, okay, of Hezbollah to actually make the agreement stick. Because if Hezbollah doesn't agree, they'll simply stay where they are,
Well,
and the Lebanese army is in no position to stop them.
right. From what I understand, Lebanese just went the Hezbollah went along with the government just to see how it would go.
Right, but did they really go along with the
I
government?
don't. I really don't think they did. I just think they're just watching.
Yes.
They know it's not going to last.
Yeah, they know it's not going to last, but also they have already prepared defensive positions south of the Litani River. They're not going to give up, those positions for a very ephemeral ceasefire.
Mm,
Now, that would be stupid. They're going to leave their people there, and there's no way the Lebanese army or the UNIFIL team is going to get them out.
mhm.
Anyway, let us go on.
The Lebanese army will be responsible for ensuring that no weapons or military material reaches Hezbollah and that all of Hezbollah's forces and equipment are dismantled or removed from the area south of Litani River.
Oh, come on, that's never going to
It's not going to happen.
happen. Yes.
And the military knows that they need Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the fighting force.
Yeah, I don't think the Lebanese their military will even try to do that,
No,
and I don't think Hezbollah is going to let them.
no. Israel, Lebanon, and the United States and France will form a mechanism group which will work with UNIFIL to monitor and ensure enforcement of the commitments made by both sides.
Yeah, it sounds like the Lebanese government has joined with Israel, the United States, and France to gang up on Hezbollah,
It does sound that way.
and that there's no real Hezbollah agreement with this.
And also, there's supposed to be an upcoming election with a U.S. friendly person listed.
Yeah, there's a U.S. friendly person listed on there, but there's also a Hezbollah person, isn't there?
I haven't seen yet. I just know that one was mentioned that and I'm thinking with Trump and his daughter Tiffany's father in law, being a Lebanese American, if there's some play in him with all this. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that he's more loyal to Lebanon than he is to the United States, right?
Hmm.
I mean, I'm being sarcastic, of course.
Yeah, but this all sounds like it's the United States and Lebanon and kind of having this, the same, putting Lebanon in the same position as Jordan and Egypt. All of them being U.S. friendly with Israel.
Yes, they're ganging up on Hezbollah.
Hmm.
Okay, please go on.
Okay, the U.S. and the United Nations will facilitate negotiations between Israel and Lebanon to settle the remaining border disputes between the two countries. The thing is so ridiculous.
Okay, now he's going into the question: what does the side letter from the U.S. to Israel mean?
Okay.
Well, I'm sure that's a good question, but I think the better question or the deeper question is, what do these bullet points mean?
Hmm.
I mean, there's no discussion from Mitchell here uh, in terms of interpreting the bullet points, which I find a little strange since he's usually so thoroughgoing. But let's go on.
Okay. Alongside the ceasefire agreement, a letter from the United States to Israel affirms American support for Israel to, quote, act in self defense.
Yeah, sure. Like they've been acting in self-defense right along.
Yeah.
Right? It's been nothing but self-defense
Yeah, right.
from the beginning. I mean, like those 3,000 people, okay, in Lebanon died because of self-defense.
Yeah. A term Israel has historically stretched beyond all recognition. Yeah, that's true. This was the Joe Biden administration's way of satisfying both Israel's demand that it be allowed to act against Hezbollah if it's felt the need.
Sorry.
Okay, if it felt the need and Lebanon's refusal to compromise its own sovereignty in such an agreement.
Yes.
The letter also commits the United States to provide Israel with intelligence on Iranian efforts to send weapons to Hezbollah or influence politics in Lebanon, not any attempt by Hezbollah to quote, infiltrate the Lebanese army. So, this is just,
Yeah, this is just an anti-Hezbollah agreement.
yeah, right. But meanwhile, the U.S. is allowed to send weapons over
Yes.
for Israel. Israel is to be permitted to act, quote, in self-defense if Hezbollah violates the ceasefire in the area south of Litani and can only act elsewhere in Lebanon if there is a violation that the Lebanese army is unable or unwilling to address. It also allows Israel to conduct reconnaissance flights over Lebanon as long as its aircraft don't breach the sound barrier.
Oh, so no sonic booms. They're not allowed to do sonic booms.
No. Lebanon and Hezbollah are not involved in the side letter, so they do not necessarily agree with its contents. Clearly, though, they are aware of it and were willing to agree to the ceasefire with the understanding that this is how the U.S. will approach any future Israeli decision on aggressive actions in Lebanon. Why did Israel and Hezbollah agree to a ceasefire now? The Hezbollah Israeli attacks did significant damage to the group. The loss of key leaders, the loss of much of its firepower, and the damage to the group's infrastructure was severe. While Hezbollah has been able to regroup sufficiently to beat back Israeli ground forces, the toll Israel has taken is significant. More importantly, the damage that Israel has done to Lebanese civilians and civilian infrastructure is more than Hezbollah can tolerate. Lebanon was already reeling from economic and physical calamities over the past few years. Hezbollah itself has become a much more polarizing group within Lebanon. But even many who still admire the group's ability to stand up against Israel's military forces are seeing too many of their children, their siblings, and their neighbors being killed. Hezbollah cannot afford to simply allow.
I'm sorry, did I move too fast?
Yes. Hezbollah cannot afford to simply allow that kind of civilian toll on the country. While people still blame Israel primarily for its crimes, Hezbollah's status in Lebanon is going to crater if they are seen as stubbornly refusing ceasefire when they can stop this devastation of Lebanese civilians. On the Israeli side, neither Benjamin Netanyahu's rivals nor allies in the Knesset are supporting him. But there is reason that the criticism is more political posturing than real attempts to pressure Netanyahu out of the ceasefire. Netanyahu was faced with the reality that Israeli forces were being stretched too thin, with fighting in Gaza ongoing and Hezbollah's ability to resist Israel's advances on the ground proving resilient. There is a real strain on their military. Some reservists have been on duty for a year or more. Perhaps more importantly, incoming U.S. President Donald Trump has made it clear to Netanyahu that he wants the fight to end. Netanyahu has no intention of stopping the genocide in Gaza, but he has every incentive to stop the fighting in Lebanon, at least for a while. Reports that Netanyahu was pushed into the agreement by a threat from Biden to support UN Security Council resolution are nonsense. Not only is it highly unlikely that Biden would suddenly take such a step, but if he did, the idea that Netanyahu would stop a war he wanted based on that idea is absurd. That threat is absurd. He would much more likely call Biden's bluff, and even if Biden was serious, he'd simply defy the resolution as Israel always has.
I think I agree with Mitchell on that.
Yeah. When Trump comes into the White House, Netanyahu can decide to try to strengthen the ceasefire sufficiently to return Israeli citizens to their home in the north, or to work with the many Iran hawks in Trump's administration to provoke a potential war for regime change in the Islamic Republic. a path which would almost certainly mean renewed fighting in Lebanon. Either way, an opportunity to lower the strain on Israel's military for a period of time will be advantageous. And then both sides are claiming victory is either right. As with ceasefire, the question of winners and losers depends greatly on perspective. In this case, I would argue that both sides lost. Hezbollah pledges to maintain solidarity with Hamas. They managed to do for a year, but under the relentless onslaught from Israel and the extensive killing of Lebanese civilians, it was eventually forced to allow the genocide in Gaza to be delinked from the fighting in the north and pursue its own ceasefire deal.
Yeah, I think that paragraph is very correct and very significant. Hezbollah responded to the Israeli pressure. And if you're looking at it as an objective observer, you have to say that they didn't maintain their commitment to the Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they were paying very, very high costs, but they were also doing tremendous damage to Israel, not known how long Israel was going to be able to sustain that particular damage. Also, as we said before, in terms of the bullet points at the beginning of this article, uh, it's not clear whether Hezbollah can afford to comply with, those particular bullet points. It's taken more than 20 years of effort to build up the catacomb of tunnels that they have,
Mm-hmm.
in the south, and all the defensive positions they've built so carefully over a period of years. Uh, why in heaven's name, would they ever give that up?
They're not going to give that up, even though it's they're making claims here. But Israel's already broken the ceasefire agreements.
They have broken the ceasefire agreements, and Hezbollah will seize on that to say, well, the Israelis have already broken the ceasefire agreement. So until they actually maintain the ceasefire for such and such and such and such a time, we're going to maintain our positions, south of the Litani River. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's all Hezbollah's got to say. We're staying there until Israel conforms to its own ceasefire deal.
Exactly. Because they have no intention. Israel has no intention. They still have their greater Israel goal. So anyway,
Yes,
Hez-
as long as this government is in power, they're going to maintain the greater Israel goals. And by the way, one of the greater Israel goals is to get rid of Lebanon itself.
yeah,
I mean, as a country, that's one of the goals because the borders of greater Israel, in terms of the greater Israel plan, extend to the borders of Turkey. In fact, they even take a little piece of Turkey. So,
yeah. There was a statement made by one of the settlers uh, that there's no such thing as a Lebanon. I mean, Lebanon, really is part of Israel.
yes,
This is
yeah,
just this made up thing, and I'm like, oh, we've heard that before.
yeah, right. It's this made up thing for 2,000 years, right?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Hezbollah lost much of its top leadership and many of its operatives. Its arms supply has been significantly diminished, and Israel's operations in both Lebanon and Syria have made resupply from Iran considerably more difficult. Ultimately, it ended up agreeing to a ceasefire that, whether directly in its text or indirectly in the side letter from the U.S. to Israel, was basically on Israel's terms.
yeah, I think that's paragraph is pretty significant because the operation you mentioned to start off the program involved. Uh, I'm sure the Israelis are supporting the Syrian operation from the Islamic extremists. Okay, one of the reasons why they're supporting that is because they're very interested in disrupting the supply lines from Iran to Hezbollah.
Hmm.
And so that's been going on for years. But also one thing I heard mentioned is one reason why Hezbollah may be supporting the ceasefire right now is because the ceasefire may allow some Hezbollah troops to go fight in Syria again. In previous years, they fought in Syria on behalf of the government against the Islamic extremists, and they may have that in mind again, and that
Hmm.
may be a reason why they ended up agreeing to the ceasefire.
Okay. Hezbollah, um, Hezbollah once again proved that despite all the devastation and slaughter that Israel brought to bear, it can not only survive but still prevent an Israeli ground invasion. On that basis, they can claim victory if they want, but it's hard to make that case if we really look at the overall balance of outcomes. Israel too is claiming victory, but a realistic look throws that claim into doubt. Ultimately, for all the blood it spilled and all the infrastructure it destroyed, Hezbollah is still standing. It's damaged, but will likely recover from the damage.
However, it won't recover so rapidly if it allows its infrastructure for defense south of the Litani River to be dismantled.
Right.
So it has to keep that intact. So that means that it itself has to violate the ceasefire as we go forward.
Hmm. Netanyahu can talk about bringing Israelis back to their homes in the north, but many will rightly doubt that it's really safe for them to go back. As much as Israel got its way in the terms of the ceasefire, they are still aware that the Lebanese army forces are no better equipped today to enforce the deal on Hezbollah than they were before. The LAF still needs to be very cautious about engaging Hezbollah, as any counter of that kind risks a quick march down the road back to civil war. Additionally, many of the LAF are going to be sympathetic to Hezbollah, or at the very least, queasy about fighting fellow Lebanese in defense of an agreement with Israel. By agreeing to the ceasefire, Israel is veering away, at least for the moment, from its efforts to compromise Iran's position in the region and provoke a confrontation that settles the cold conflict between the two states that has been simmering for decades. That could change in the coming months, but for now, this is at least a pause in that effort, perhaps even a step back. One more loser is worth mentioning, and that is international law. France was eager to be part of this process, as it often is with Lebanon. Its former mandatory territory is involved. Israel, angry that France has taken the position that it would obey the ruling of the International Criminal Court that issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, opposed French involvement. To convince Israel to allow France to participate in the monitoring process, French authorities said that Netanyahu would be immune from French enforcement of the ICC warrant. This transactional approach to law is a major blow to the gains international law made with the ICC warrants. Was there a Trump influence? Donald Trump communicated clearly to Netanyahu that he wanted the fighting to end before he took office. He doesn't want to inherit Joe Biden's mess, and he wants to enhance the illusion that he brings peace while the Democrats bring war. Netanyahu won't end the genocide in Gaza. It is clear that Israel is digging in for a long operation there. The fighting with Hezbollah can be stopped, at least for a while, and that will have some benefits for Israel as well. But as much as Trump might talk about being against a war in the Middle East, he picks for senior staff reflects a very different agenda. His ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, is a Christian Zionist who yearns to see the third temple built on the ruins of Al-Aqsa Mosque and believes there is, quote, no such thing as Palestinian.
Really amazing, isn't it?
Right. And Palestinian is if you looked in the Bible, the Philistines.
Yeah, the Philistines.
Yeah,
There for a long time.
exactly. His Secretary of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth, sports a Jerusalem cross tattoo, a symbol of the Crusaders and the Christian nationalism, and was enough of concern that when he was in the National Guard in 2021, he was barred from providing security at Joe Biden's inauguration.
That's a funny one.
Yeah, major Iran hawks such as Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, as well as Islamophobic ideologues like Seb Gorka, are also key figures on Trump's team. Yeah, Marco Rubio is well funded.
Yes, he is well funded. And Seb Gorka is a loudmouthed idiot.
He is, yes. With this lineup, there is every reason for Netanyahu to believe that he will be able to manipulate circumstances toward the large scale attack on Iran that he has wanted for decades. Trump is also going to be sympathetic to the Gulf Arab monarchies, and they are working very hard to avoid that outcome. The Saudis, Emiratis, and Qataris will be able to incentivize Trump with business interests and massive arm purchases, whereas Netanyahu has, at times, fallen out of favor with Trump. These factors give some reason for hope.
But I think not much reason for hope.
No. But Netanyahu knows Washington better than the Arab leaders and will have far more sway over members of Trump's team. It will remain to be seen which of those influences prove the more powerful. But at least for the first few months of Trump's term, it seems likely that the ceasefire with Lebanon should hold. Given the amount of blood spilled in Lebanon since September, any such respite has to be welcomed. And I have to say, where Israel is concerned, I mean, they experienced a lot of loss. I mean, the soldiers and um, just a lot of the injuries as well to the soldiers and stuff. So,
Injuries to the soldiers and stuff, but also the bombings in Tel Aviv and Haifa
yes,
from the missiles and rockets were becoming increasingly significant. Israeli society was in chaos, really largely from Hezbollah attacks, the Houthi attacks, of course. The Houthi attacks haven't stopped. I don't know if the Houthis will stop. And that's still going to impose an economic cost, okay, on Israel. Uh, I guess I have to mention, yeah, yet Netanyahu knows Washington better than the Arab leaders and will have far more sway over members of Trump's team. But I think that paragraph should be mentioning also the role of the donors here.
yeah,
Okay, because if he does have far more sway over members of Trump's team, it's because of the many millions of dollars that have gone to his campaign. Hundreds of millions of dollars from, I guess, Israeli lobby donors.
right,
That's very, very, very significant and always has to be mentioned. You should never fail to mention it, in my view. Okay. And also, at least for the first few months of Trump's term, it seems likely the ceasefire with Lebanon should hold. But if the Iranians retaliation, which they have threatened numerous times. Now, somebody said today, I think it was Dan Davis on his that the Iran uh, has agreed to postpone its retaliation until after the ceasefire is over. Okay, I can hardly believe that.
I don't believe it. That was something that was put out by the New York Times.
Oh, well, then I definitely don't believe it.
Because I did research on that, 'cause I saw it trending, and it was the New York Times. So I went to look it up. There is not a single Iranian source.
Okay, good for you. Good for you. I'm glad you did that research because I don't believe that for a minute. I think the Iranians, I'm still expecting an Iranian attack either tonight or tomorrow night,
Hmm.
at Monday night, the latest, because I think they are locked and loaded.
They are. They're preparing.
Yes, and they're about to come down really, really hard, on Israel. And I don't think that the situation in Syria that we were talking about earlier is going to give them pause. On the contrary, it gives them really good reason to hit Israel very, very, very hard.
Yes, didn't they hit the consulate, the Iranian consulate in Syria?
Oh, but I'm not worried about the Iranian consulate. They've already retaliated for that. But
And
what
then
we
again it happened.
uh, uh, when did they hit the Iranian consulate? It's in Syria. You mean in the last 2 days or something?
Yes, yes.
Oh, so they hit the Iranian consulate again. They expect the Iranians to just sit still for that again. No, I think the Iranians are going to come at them now really strongly.
Hmm.
And if the Iranians do come at them, that's certainly going to disturb this ceasefire because Hezbollah is not going to sit on the sidelines. They're going to add to the Iranian attack.
Exactly. That's what
So,
I was thinking.
I can't see why Mitchell didn't mention that. I mean, he's usually so thorough about these things.
Yeah, because I've been following a lot through like the Cradle and Press TV.
Good.
And the one thing that was coming out from Syria was the fact that for the Syrian people not to pay attention to a lot of the media. There's a lot of propaganda out there. So we already know that anyway about, trying to say that's, so and such and such area was taken over and blah, blah, blah. And then I saw some clips on Press TV where they were saying it wasn't taken over and there's still battles going on there. So, and then interesting enough too, I can't even upload the clips onto my Facebook because now they're saying that they're lowering the stuff to the feed, and there's a problem with it, and all this other stuff. Anything from Press TV, when they never did that before to me.
Oh, so you think that they're now trying to repress Press TV?
Right, because it shows what liars, they're trying to put out. The Western media is trying to put out stories, and then it gets debunked by Press TV, and so they just don't want it. And this is just basic news programs
Yeah,
that I normally put up.
this is ridiculous. So Lana says I just checked the temperature for a city in Israel, low in 50s and high in the 60s. Not nearly the freeze in Russia, in Ukraine. I don't mean that the loss of electricity for months now in Gaza is insignificant, but I am in the cold here in Minnesota, and being outside for even 10 or 15 minutes is dangerous. I hope the conflicts end all over. So sad.
Mhm.
Lana.
Living in those tents.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know. Living in those tents, even if it's in the low 50s, it can't be fun for sure.
Mm.
Lana says, I have Lebanese friends in New York who would argue against Lebanon being part of Israel. Yeah, I don't. I think all you have to do is consult the Lebanese in Lebanon.
Right.
Like Elijah Manier, okay, and Gotti Francis. They certainly don't want Lebanon to become part of Israel.
I mean, Hezbollah is the one that's going to protect Lebanon and fight for Lebanon, so it doesn't become, part of Israel.
Yes.
There's not much the army could do, Lebanese army or anybody. Hezbollah is the main source.
Yeah, right. But Hezbollah has shown that it can stop the Israelis from from permanently occupying even 1 inch of Lebanon, or at least one further inch. Of course, they still have the Shabbat Farms area, but they've had that for decades and decades. But anything new, okay, in Lebanon, they get in, they occupy a few kilometers worth of space, and they're immediately driven out by Hezbollah with very, very heavy losses.
Hmm.
So Hezbollah is not going to let them in. Uh,
No.
okay, Lana says, every time I hear Waltz, I think they're talking about Tim Waltz. Yeah, me too. But of course, it's, as you know, as you see there in your comment, and last names are spelled differently. So the Earl K. of Lurie, thank you for coming, Earl of Lurie, says, Gorka lives in fantasy land. Where will he get the weapons to give to Ukraine? I have no idea. We're fresh out of weapons, or about to be fresh out of weapons. Evelina says, Gorka is of Hungarian origin, and his father was a Nazi. Uh, I had no idea that his father was a Nazi, but it doesn't surprise me. A lot of the Huns were Nazis in the Second World War. There was a big Nazi movement there, and uh, uh, it was run in Hungary at the time and aiding the SS in rounding up Jews. Anyway, let us get on with the topics of tonight. Our third topic is, let me share the screen for it. How Russia and China are rewiring Greek mythology. And this one is by Pepe Escobar, November 29th, 2024. It's from the UN's Review again. At least it's where we picked it up. It was probably published at either The Cradle or Strategic Culture. Let's see before we get started. Usually originally appears in one of the, republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation. The reason why we pick it up at ons.com is if we listed the Strategic Culture Foundation as a source and linked to it, then Facebook would ding us for that because they don't like the Strategic Culture Foundation. But if we get it from ons.com, they let it ride. So here we are. As Russia revamps the role of Zeus, China is busy revamping the role of Hermes. Yes, Hermes was the god of travel, the god of, he's the same deity, okay, as Mercury for the Romans. So he's also the god of speed, I guess. So, oh, the wonders chips from dishwashers are able to unleash, says Pepe. How come Zeus, king of the gods, could not have foreseen it, especially when his divine intuition was aware that in the future his thunderbolts would be replicated in Russia via Oreshnik, a seemingly harmless hazelnut tree. Uh, mythology prefigures Post everything reality, says Pepe. I guess you can always find something in mythology that prefigures everything, in reality. Maybe. At least you can try. It's good as a literary device for Pepe here. Now let's go back to Newton for a bit. So, from myth to Newton, right? Based on his formulas, a 1 meter long uranium projectile flying at very high speed is capable of perforating 6 meters of hard rock to the sound of Deep Purple's Highway Star. I admit to unfamiliarity with Deep Purple's work, and I much admire the universality of Pepe's scope and cultural tastes. A warhead traveling at 1,200 meters per second is capable of perforating 46 meters of concrete. I wonder where he got that calculation. That's very interesting. Now imagine impact velocity greater than the speed of sound. The impact depth, of course, is exponentially fiercer. Impact shock at very high velocity turns whatever is ahead into gas. Okay. A kinetic shock wave pops up as deep as 50 meters, swarming the deep underground and crushing, destroying, actually imploding everything in its wake. So, Oreshnik doesn't explode, but it implodes. That's what's happened deep underground at the U.S. Mosh plant in Dnipropetrovsk, as Oreshnik was conceived, by improving these physical principles, and Russia only used blanks for this first Oreshnik test instead of warheads. Satisfaction guaranteed or your money back. Now cut to Russia and Kazakhstan's presidents Vladimir Putin and Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, deepening their strategic partnership face-to-face in Astana, including a renewed drive for strengthening cooperation within the CSTO. I've forgotten what the CSTO stands for. It's, of course, the TO is Treaty Organization, and the C is probably for Central Asian, but I'm not sure what the S stands for. Further, Kazakhstan was officially invited to become a BRICS partner. Putin answered quite a few press questions on Oreshnik and the wider NATO proxy war. But arguably what was most intriguing was his speech at a restricted attendance meeting of the CSTO Collective Security Council. Some of it deserves to be quoted at length, not least because of the president quipping about, quote, customer satisfaction, unquote. So, I suppose that last paragraph implies that Pepe was at the restricted attendance meeting of the CSTO Collective Security Council. Seems to suggest that anyway, if not imply it. Quote from the president, President Putin, that is. The Russian Iskander missile system and its modifications represent the Russian analog of all three ATACMS missiles modifications. The warhead weight in TNT equivalent is about the same, but Iskander has a longer range. The new U.S.-made PRSM missile is not superior to its Russian counterparts in any specification. The Storm Shadow air-launched missile, the French Scalp, and the German, the Taurus, have a warhead weighing between 450 and 480 kilograms in TNT equivalent. Remember, folks, that a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So therefore, 580 kilograms exceeds 1,000 pounds of TNT. And a range of 500 to 650 kilometers. The German Taurus missile has a 650-kilometer range. The KH-101 air-launched missile is the Russian analog of these systems, which is comparable in terms of the power of the warhead, but significantly exceeds each of the European-made systems in terms of range. The new U.S.-made PRSM missiles, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the JASSM, that is the JASSM, are inferior to their Russian counterparts in terms of technical specifications. This is Putin talking about the technical specifications of these weapons. It's a long quote from Putin. Without a doubt, we are aware of the number of the relevant weapon systems that are in service of our potential adversaries. We know how many of them are kept in storage facilities. We know their exact location, how many weapons have been supplied to Ukraine, and how many more are planned to be supplied. As far as the production of relevant missile systems and relevant equipment is concerned, Russia has 10 times more of them than the combined output of all NATO countries. Next year, we will increase the production by another 25 to 30%. We can see that the Kiev regime ringleaders are begging their masters for military equipment of different kind. Let no one forget about the caliber, Kinjal, and Zircon, hypersonic missile systems which are unmatched around the world in terms of their technical specifications. Their production is being ramped up and is going at full speed. More such products may show up shortly on our menu with the products of this class, if I may put it that way. As they say, customer satisfaction is guaranteed, unquote. I think here he was referring to, he was quipping about the likely satisfaction of the targets of these missiles, or perhaps he was quipping about the customer satisfaction of those nations he was going to sell those missiles to. It can be interpreted in either way. The next section is speaks of a meteorite collision ahead. Putin compared an Oreshnik strike with the impact from a collision with a meteorite. Quote, we know from history what meteorites fell where and what the consequences were. Sometimes it was enough to form entire lakes, unquote. Even as he stressed that, quote, again, publicity is inappropriate when dealing with new weapons, unquote. That was exactly the case with Oreshnik. Quote, we waited until the moment when we conducted the test and, in fact, saw a result. Then we made an announcement, unquote. This sets the context for what Mikhail Kovalchuk, the actual creator of these seemingly innocent hazelnuts, the post-everything replica of the thunderbolts of Zeus, told Izvestia on the sidelines of the 4th Congress of Young Scientists in the Federal Territory of Sirius. Where is the Federal Territory of Sirius? Or is that simply one of Pepe's jokes? Kovalchuk is the president of the Kirchhoff Institute National Research Center. Essentially, he remarked how, quote, the materials that Russia has that can withstand ultra-high temperatures make it possible to create the Oreshnik system, and will make it possible to create other types of hypersonic weapons, unquote. The whole planet may be asking, how did Russia manage to overtake everyone else? Quote, because we are one of the 5 world leaders. We have created hypersonic weapons in a short period of time. And these are materials that used to work at 1500 degrees, then at 1800 degrees, and these at 2000. Now he's talking Celsius here, folks, not Fahrenheit. That is very important. So when you read these degrees, if you want to get approximately to Fahrenheit, then just, simply double them. It's quick and dirty, not completely accurate, but close enough. And we did it while others did not. And there's more, Kovalchuk said, quote, other materials that can withstand high temperatures will make it possible to create even more weapons. The next step should be materials that can withstand 2,500 to 3,000 degrees. Again, Celsius he's talking about. I'm sure we can't wait for the new ones that can withstand 2,500 to 3,000 degrees. That would make it possible, for instance, missiles flying at very low altitudes at Mach 15 or even Mach 20, creating even more utterly devastating impact, including plasma shock, than the already tested Oreshnik. I think Mr. Kovalchuk must have something of a mad scientist in him.
I wonder what that does to the Earth after being plummeted with that forever.
One might well wonder if we have 3,000 of these weapons going off at the same time or something like that.
Yeah.
Putin, for his part, also said almost casually that the Ministry of Defense is currently, quote, picking targets, unquote, for more strikes by Oreshnik, including Ukrainian, quote, decision-making centers, unquote, industrial production sites and military facilities. Is NATO listening? Obviously not. Pepe says, what maximum soft power is all about. As Russia revamps the role of Zeus, China is busy revamping the role of Hermes. Beijing is now selling US dollar bonds in Saudi Arabia. That means that the more China sells these bonds, these Arab US dollars can be diverted to Belt and Road Initiative, BRI partner nations, as loans. So they are able to repay their extortion-style debts to the hegemon-controlled IMF and the World Bank. You could also have mentioned the IADB, which is not as large as the other 2 banks, but is a big bank in servicing the countries of Latin America. And they also have extortion-style debts. The best part is that these BRI partners can repay those dollar loans to China using what else? The yuan, as well as the merchandise they produce or their natural resources. Pepe says, call it a fast de-dollarization highway, and no one should ever forget that China US dollar bonds are backed by gold, while US dollar bonds are backed by a printer. Oh, that's interesting. I guess I have to add here, China US dollar bonds may be backed by gold, but gold is a limited resource, even for China, while US dollar bonds are backed by a printer. which means the U.S. can always pay off their dollar bonds in the amount that was contracted for. China can probably do that too because it has enough of U.S. dollars itself that it's holding. But what I'm trying to point out here is that the fact that these dollar bonds are backed by gold is of no significance. Because when you buy a dollar bond, all you expect to get back is the principal that you put down for that bond and the interest on that bond.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. can always pay the interest and always pay the principal because its dollar bonds are backed by a printer. So I don't think Pepe really understands why it's important to have a fiat currency. In other words, at heart, he's a Goldie. And that means he has the misunderstandings of currency that Goldies have. Going on, assorted Western blah, blah, blah about a heavily indebted China's nonsense. China's avowedly huge debt is overwhelmingly domestic debt in yuan. China uses its internal bond market to help companies invest their money and earn a decent return with virtually no risk, and all that while stimulating the economy. All that is true, but you have to note that the huge domestic debt in yuan is payable in new yuan. And the Chinese yuan currency is also backed by a printer. Well, these things are not really backed by printer, but what we mean is that they're backed by the capability of China to issue new yuan, which is equivalent to the capability of the U.S. to issue new dollars. In that respect, the currencies of the two nations are no different. And we ought to be noting that. Okay. Pepe says China uses its internal bond market to help companies invest their money and earn a decent return with virtually no risk, and all that while stimulating the economy. And I have to say that China is using its internal bond market in a better way than we are using our internal bond market. We seem to be using it to give all kinds of unearned dollars to people who do not need them. Going on. Now, Beijing came up with the brilliant idea of issuing bonds in U.S. dollars to extract those petrodollars from Saudi so they don't go back directly to the U.S. Treasury. I think people don't understand that when dollars go back to the U.S. Treasury, that those dollars that go back to the U.S. Treasury are destroyed by the U.S. Treasury. In other words, those dollars, when they go back, don't enrich, the United States. People have to realize that. It would be good if they did. Everybody knows that scores of nations are not buying up U.S. Treasuries and U.S. bonds like they used to. Well, maybe not, like they used to, but the Treasury bond auctions always sell out. So what's the difference? People should consider that question. So bond yields need to go up. Why do they need to go up? All the bond issues are still sold out. As long as they're still sold out, the bond yields don't need to go up. And by the way, when they stop selling out, even then the bond yields don't actually need to go up because the federal government could always turn to overt congressional financing or platinum coin seigniorage. We don't have to pay any more in bond yields than we're paying now. In fact, we're already paying too much. Beijing found a way to ensure borrowing yields remain high making borrowing costs expensive for the United States. Pepe, I don't think things work that way. I think you're mistaken about that. In our country
Mm-hmm.
are actually controlled by Fed policy. It's the Fed who sets the interest rates. It isn't the bond markets. You have a misunderstanding, Pepe, of how federal financing works. Okay, I love Pepe, by the way, but he does have a bad understanding of how federal financing works in the United States. He doesn't know a bit of MMT. He ought to talk to Michael Hudson. He's a friend of Michael Hudson's. So he ought to talk to him about how federal financing works in the United States, because Mike Hudson knows. The most important vector is that these US dollars raised from bonds will function as a loan out to a great deal of the global south to pay off their exorbitant interest loans from the IMF and the World Bank. Instead of paying 20 to 30%, Beijing will just charge these nations the bond rate, 5% or so. That is good. That is really a wonderful thing if Beijing does that. That will be part of the transition away from the dollar, and it will be part of the victory of BRICS, over the dollar, which would be a good thing for the world. So basically what China's doing is turning into a front to borrow cheap US dollars for the global south. This is what maximum soft power is all about. By the way, I think that part of this analysis by Pepe is brilliant. Brilliant.
Yes, it is.
Good that he saw that. He may not understand how US dollar financing works here in the United States, but he understands what China's doing pretty damn well. What will happen to those US dollars repaid by the global south? Excess liquidity will plunge the US into another inflation crisis. Stock markets will boom, but interest rates will go up, making borrowing even more expensive. Well, once again, that's up to the Federal Reserve. If the Federal Reserve keeps those interest rates up low, then borrowing costs are not going to go up. Now, I have to say, a Federal Reserve headed by Jay Powell will make borrowing even more expensive. But if we can get somebody like a Warren Mosler in as chairperson of the Feds, the interest rates would be at zero all the time. Because that you don't control inflation by playing around with interest rates. That does not work, as witnessed the Fed's recent activity in raising interest rates. Did it do anything to lower inflation? No. It was the restoration of the supply chains and the pressure to stop the price gouging that brought inflation down here in the United States. The Fed's charging higher interest rates actually worked against lowering the inflation. Going on, couple that with high tariffs, and as a wily Hong Kong trader put it, quote, it's a perfect storm, baby, unquote. So welcome to China playing Hermes, son of Zeus, and the gorgeous Pleiad, whose name is Maya. Hermes, among his endless attributes, is the god of travelers, roads, and trade. BRI connectivity corridors. He's also the god of cunning, diplomacy, language, writing, and also astrology. He must therefore be the favorite god of Pepe. The herald and personal messenger of Zeus, Hermes also happens to be a divine trickster, Now buy those US dollars in Saudi Arabia from me. Once again, here we see Russia playing chess, thinking several moves ahead, while China is playing Go. Okay, Weiqi. Also thinking several moves ahead, and the partnership all along in sync is spawning a lovely Greek mythology revival. The Hazel Thunderbolts have rendered DOA the entire hegemon gambit against Russia. Bye-bye strategic advantage, quote-unquote, acquired by provoking Moscow to strike with tactical nuclear weapons. Now Russia can strike anywhere, anytime at 12,000 kilometers per hour with no radiation involved and with no pileup of civilian casualties. Talk about a kinetic shockwave, both military and geopolitical. No wonder NATO Stan is clueless. Zeus oversees the chessboard from up there with a smirk. Zeus in this case is Putin. With a smirk, drinking a cool bottle of Brunello. I must admit, I had to Google what that referred to. Okay, and I learned that it is a wonderful Italian red wine. Okay, a bottle of which, at least a bottle of the reserve, costs $3,995 right now. So this was republished from the Strategic Culture Foundation by permission of the author or representative. Before turning to a final topic, I will entertain your comments. I hope you found my reading entertaining. Sirius near the border of Georgia. Thank you, Lana. That's very, very helpful. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, thank you, is an intergovernmental military alliance in Eurasia consisting of 6 post-Soviet states: Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. A lot of the stands involved here, huh?
Yes, they take a stand.
They take a stand, yeah. So thank you, Russia. Alana also says, Mercury, also tough to pin down quick, think Gemini. Lana says, from Google, in ancient Greek having a lot of trouble with mythology tonight. Zeus was the king of the gods and the god of the sky, weather, thunder, and law, okay, and order. Actually, it's important to note, okay, that Yahweh was originally a sky god as well. Before the mythology of universalism developed, but at first he was one of the sky gods, okay, of the Israelis, the ancient Israelis. Earl of Laurie says deterrents don't seem to work on the irrational actors in the West. Got to sell those arms and steal those resources, even if it kills everyone. Yes, Earl, you make an intelligent comment. And Lana says, can you sell a T-bond to a third party? Just sign it over. Yes, you can. You can sell a T-bond to a private party. I don't know if you say please pay to or what you do, but yes, you can sell T-bonds. And she wants to know what backed by gold means. I think backed by gold means that if China runs out of dollars, it's going to pay in gold. Now, of course, it only has to pay in an amount of gold that's equivalent to the dollars that the principal of the bond and the interest in the bond, was worth. So even though the U.S. payment, is not backed by gold, it doesn't have to be because the U.S. is the currency issuer, of the dollar. So the U.S. repayment promise is just as good as the Chinese repayment process. Because in each case, what you're paying is the amount of dollars that are owed, even if you have to pay those dollars in the form of ounces, of gold. But the promise of the bond is to repay in dollars. It's not to repay in gold. Only dollar equivalents in gold. So Lana says, the third parties have decided their second market is backed by gold. Hilarious. No, I don't think. Who knows what hilarious thoughts they have about, the dollar. They don't understand, the dollar as a means of financing. So their thoughts concerning the dollar are always hilarious. Lana says, yeah, Pepe is talking out of his league here, but it allows us to discuss, which is good. Yes, that's right. And the Earl of Lurie says, Pepe overestimates Western restraint here. The West seems determined to escalate regardless of a nuclear deterrent. I don't think this will move them. Well, I disagree, Earl. I think that as the Oreshniks take root again and again, it will dawn on the Western decision makers that it doesn't make sense to escalate to a nuclear deterrent, because they will lose either with a conventional deterrent or a nuclear deterrent. Earl says, sorry for the redundant comments. I deleted that first one, but I guess it showed up anyway. That's okay, Earl. Your comments have been very good, and I thank you for them. Well, let us now move on. We're only a shade behind. Let us now move on to the final topic, which is on the Oreshnik as well. It is based on a piece by the inimitable Scott Ritter. People increasingly refer to him that way. It's in the form of an article called Fahrenheit 7232, which is obviously a takeoff on Ray Bradbury's famous book, Fahrenheit 451. That book was about the burning of books, however. In other words, Fahrenheit 451 is the temperature at which the books burn. And Fahrenheit 7232 is the temperature at which the Oreshnik burns through things. Quote from Ray Bradbury at Fahrenheit 451. Quote, the sun burned every day. Oh, I should say before I deal with this. This illustration of the missiles raining down and the world burning up, complete with a mushroom cloud. It's an illustration by Victoria Ritter and S.E. Poling from Daydreams, which is a publication of these two folks. Victoria Ritter, of course, is one of Scott's two daughters. Very talented young lady, I think. This quote: "The sun burned every day. It burned time. The world rushed in a circle and turned on its axis, and time was busy burning the years and the people anyway, without any help from him. So if he burned things with the firemen and the sun burned time, that meant that everything burned," unquote. Scott goes on. Annie Jacobson, in her book, quote, "Nuclear War, a Scenario," unquote, describes the first few seconds of a 1 megaton thermonuclear weapon detonating over an American city as beginning, quote, "with a flash of light and heat so tremendous it is impossible for the human mind to comprehend. 180 degrees Fahrenheit is 4 or 5 times hotter than the temperature that occurs at the center of the sun. That has to be a misprint." I'm not even sure right now of the temperature that occurs at the center of the sun, but I am pretty sure that the temperature at the surface of the sun is about 11,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that it is much, much hotter at the center of the sun, and much, much hotter uh, 4 or 5 times that temperature is, of course, much, much hotter. The fireball produced by this explosion is so intense that, quote, "that concrete surfaces explode, metal objects melt or evaporate, stone shatters, humans instantaneously convert into combusting carbon." Russian President Vladimir Putin, addressing the Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO, at a meeting held in the Kazakh capital of Astana this past Thursday, declared that Russia's new intermediate-range ballistic missile Oreshnik, which was used to strike a Ukrainian military production facility near the city of Dnipropetrovsk, possessed destructive power comparable to that of a nuclear weapon. Quote, "Dozens of warheads, self-guided units attacked the target at a speed of 10 Mach, 10 times the speed of sound," unquote, Putin said, quote, "This is about 3 kilometers per second. The temperature of the striking elements reaches 4,000 degrees, in other words, 7,000 degrees plus Celsius. I'm sorry, Fahrenheit. If my memory serves me right," Putin noted, quote again, "the temperature on the surface of the sun is 5,500 to 6,000 degrees. That's Celsius. Therefore, everything that is in the epicenter of the explosion is divided into fractions, into elementary particles. Everything turns essentially into dust," unquote. In short, the Russian president declared the use of several Oreshnik missiles in one strike would be comparable in destructive power to a nuclear weapon. And here is a picture from Hiroshima in the immediate aftermath of the atomic bomb attack on August the 6th, 1945. The imagery presented in Annie Jacobson's book is so utterly horrific as to surpass the ability of most humans to comprehend, let alone apply real-life examples that allow for a modicum of intellectual comprehension. As such, when Vladimir Putin made his analogous claim regarding the comparative destructive power of a hydrogen bomb and the Oreshnik missile's conventional warhead. One's brain is deflected away from the unthinkable and toward the practical. The Oreshnik the missile attack against the Yuzmash factory outside Dnipropetrovsk produced stunning visual images of 6 separate impact events, each comprised of 6 luminescent rods, quote unquote, impacting the factory grounds. The Russian government had alluded to the destruction caused by this attack as being devastating. Ukrainians, on the other hand, have minimized the damage done as negligible. In theory, the destructive potential of kinetic, quote, rods, unquote, striking the Earth at hypersonic speed is enormous. A 2003 U.S. Air Force study in what were called hypervelocity rod bundles, HRB, unquote, speculated that the 20-foot by 6-foot rods of tungsten, when dropped from a space-based platform and impacting Earth at the speed of 10 times the speed of sound, would produce results equivalent to a nuclear explosion. Without the radiation, of course. In 2018, Chinese researchers, and without the explosion, okay, with the implosion. In 2018, Chinese researchers from the North University of China, located in the city of Taiyuan, Shaanxi Province, working with the university's Intelligent Weapon Research Institute, test-fired a tungsten rod from an unnamed high-altitude platform. In the test, the 140-kilogram tungsten rod was fired at a speed of over 4 kilometers per second and produced a crater with a depth of 3 meters and a width of over 4.5 meters, far from the effect one would expect from a nuclear weapon. Moreover, the penetration effect of the tungsten rod was reduced at speeds over 3.5 times the speed of sound. And there's a photo of the Oreshnik submunitions impacting Dnipropetrovsk on November 21st, 2024. The physics surrounding the effects of the Oreshnik payload remain confusing to even those who have spent a lifetime studying the physics of such weapons. Dr. Theodore Postel, a weapons expert from MIT, he's a professor emeritus at MIT, has done some preliminary studies on the Oreshnik which mirror the assessment of the researchers from the North University of China. But Russian experts have spoken about advances made by Russia in material sciences associated with deployments of materials at hypersonic speed, advances which may alter the physics in question. For instance, the pure tungsten rod envisioned by the U.S. Air Force, tested by the Chinese, may, in the case of Oreshnik, have had a coating of an advanced alloy formed from a tantalum carbide and hafnium carbide materials used by Russia in re-entry operations from space, where heat absorption is desired. The Russians point out that Oreshnik rods, quote unquote, whatever their precise composition, would, once heated to 4,000 degrees Celsius, 7,232 degrees Fahrenheit, would vaporize steel and concrete, including reinforced concrete on contact, quote, it would vaporize, unquote, as President Putin observed, quote, everything that is in the epicenter of the explosion is divided into fractions, into elementary particles. Everything turns essentially into dust, unquote. The underlying question remains, how much of an area does the, quote, epicenter of the explosion, unquote, encompass? Ukraine has been surprisingly reticent about documenting its claims that the Oreshnik caused only minimal damage, unquote, only noting that the warheads which struck at Dnipropetrovsk carried no explosives and as a result did not cause significant damage. This conclusion was shared by German experts commenting in Bild uh, uh, in that magazine. Jeffrey Lewis, the director of the East Asia Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in California, in a recent interview with Reuters, commented on the Oreshnik, noting that, quote, this is a new capability, but this is not a new capability that represents a dramatic change in the way that conventional weapons are developed, unquote. He continued. It is a series of old technologies that have been put together in a new way, unquote.
I wonder how long it would take to be livable again.
Well, it should be livable almost immediately, but there's nothing to live in.
It's going to be heat.
Right, but the heat would dissipate fairly quickly, I think. Lewis added that using the Oreshnik with conventional warheads. Here's a picture of Oreshnik debris recovered by Ukraine. I don't think we can tell too much from that picture. Everything seems all twisted. Lewis added that using the Oreshnik with conventional warheads was an expensive means, quote, to deliver not that much destruction, unquote, noting that given the expense associated with uh, um, uh, missiles of the Oreshnik class, using this type of weapon to hit Ukraine was more likely designed to achieve a psychological effect than military impact, quote. If it were inherently terrifying, Putin would just use it, but that's not quite enough. Lewis said, quote, he had to use it and then do a press conference and then do another conference and say, quote, hey, this thing is really scary. You should be scared, unquote. While Lewis' analysis is open to scrutiny, this claim that Oreshnik was simply a bunch of old technologies that have been, quote, put together in new ways, unquote, is refuted by Russian statements in the evidence. His analysis of the reentry system is sophomoric and does not take into account Russian reports which suggest the Oreshnik make use of new independent post-boost vehicles, or IPBVs, known in Russia as Block, the Individual Go Rasvidnenia, or BIR. Likewise, Lewis' critique seems to simply parrot Ukrainian battle damage assessments without any attempt to delve further into the new technologies associated with the kinetic rods used by the Oreshnik. And there's a diagram. A schematic of Oreshnik warhead by Theodore Postal incorporating new Russia BIR technology, because Ted Postal assumes they would make use of their BIR technology. It should be noted that Theodore Postal, in conducting his analysis, has incorporated these new technologies in his work. And that is the end of this Scott Ritter blog post, on the Oreshnik. So what it gives us is, it tells us about the disagreement concerning the destructiveness, of the Oreshnik. Actually, Ted Postal's analysis, though, tends to agree with the earlier Chinese research and with the claims, of the Russians. But we will know more when the next use of the Oreshnik actually comes around, while Scott shows us both the claims made for the Oreshnik and the claims against the Oreshnik. In his objective article, it is quite clear that Scott himself is closer to believing the Putin version, and that is indicated by his title of the article, which, of course, again, is Fahrenheit 7232. So, I think that's an enormously interesting article, especially when coupled with the Pepe article. The two, I think, work together. to speak of a new era in weapon systems, and I believe that's what we've got. I'll now look at your final comments. I see John B. is here. Oh, and also attendance has greatly multiplied in the last period of time. We now have 65 people here all of a sudden.
Well, I have to tell you, I hadn't shared earlier. I remembered that I hadn't shared.
Well, thank you. That's probably what's responsible.
I read the articles and then I never got into sharing.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's why in the beginning I said, why didn't I say something about let's share first and have a little discussion first before, while we're sharing before we got into the articles, but we got into the articles and I never thought about sharing.
Well, your sharing has certainly worked because we are almost at the total we were in some of the previous streams. But here we are. Let's go to the latest comments. I guess we start with John B. John B says, Pepe, Arab US dollars can be diverted to BRI nations as loans so they're able to repay their extortion style debts to the IMF. Yeah, I think that's wonderful, don't you, John B? World Bank. Why would China issue the USD proceeds of US bond sales to BRI as loans when China can spend those USDs directly on BRI infrastructure? That's an interesting question, but I suppose it's because but China may want to have the other nations be spending but directly, and they also want perhaps to eventually be repaid but something. I suppose that's the motivation. Repaying exorbitant U.S. loans helps the U.S. extract wealth. Better for China if the indebted nations default on their odious, U.S. loans. Yes, I'm all for them defaulting also, but if they default and they are not in BRICS, okay, and have access to alternative financing, okay, in other currencies, they would be in grave trouble. But with the new development bank and changes, in the new development bank, I think that problem will be greatly alleviated. But I agree with you, John B. It's better if the indebted nations just default on their odious loans, and then the U.S. tries to sanction them, okay, and then they run to the BRICS nations and the alternative institutions which BRICS, okay, is setting up. Earl Lurie says, got to go to bed. Thanks for the stream. Well, thank you for coming, Earl. Lana says, I shared to Facebook. Thank you very much, Lana. I'm sure that did quite a lot also to increase the attendance, okay, at the stream. So I think that does it for tonight. I actually figured this for a 2-hour stream. So it turns out we're right on the money, unless we want to have some further discussion.
I think we should, since we just got a lot of people here. Maybe we should just if you want to put up the articles again, we're not going to read the whole thing, but we'll just discuss them a bit for the people that came on later.
Okay, which article would you like me to put up again?
Or whichever ones you think, are important for the people that came in late.
Well, it depends on when they started to come in. Do you think that they came in time for Pepe's article?
Well, I know people came in towards the last article, I think. So
Yeah, but I'm not sure they came in for any of the other 3 articles.
I know, I don't think so either. So we kind of just go over what we talked about.
Okay, let's do that. I will put up first the first article by John Helmer. Okay, we will go through that. Okay, this is an article by John Helmer, published in UNS.com. And the headline is Putin announces retaliation strikes against Americans, French, and electric grid targets. Oreshnik saved for a rainy day. And what this is about, okay, it's about, first of all, what Putin discussed in remarks to journalists from Russia on Thursday evening. He discussed detailed target and damage reports by military bloggers published between noon and 1300 Moscow time. These indicated that strikes by Caliber and KH-101 missiles, drones, and other weapons hit targets across the electricity system of Ukraine, including the western regions of Rivne, Chelmnitsky. That one is hard to pronounce. Also Valin and Vinnytsia. Power blackouts were reported to be widespread from a line of combat in the east to the Polish border in the west, with up to 11 hours of power outage in Kyiv, where the temperature was dropping below freezing. Several questions were asked about the use of the Oreshnik missile in Russian retaliation. Putin quipped it was being saved for a rainy day. And that was a major thrust, of the article. What Putin talked about was all of the variations Russia can use and will use to retaliate. And what he focused upon was, when he was asked again about the Oreshnik system, he said, quote, "Do you think these strikes on the Kyiv decision makers are also possible with Oreshnik because nothing else seems to be able to get it?" Putin replied, quote, in Soviet times, there was that joke about weather forecasts. Quote, "The forecast is everything is possible today during the day," which meant, and he said, "I wish to reiterate once more," and this is a quote from Putin, "we will certainly respond to such acts of aggression against the Russian Federation. The timing, methods, and weapons employed will be determined by the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense, as each target necessitates a specific approach and appropriate weaponry," unquote. So he's saying there, each and every target, we take a specific approach, as if to say sometimes the Oreshnik will be used, but we have all manner of alternatives, and we can use all manner, of alternatives. And he also talked about some strikes against the French in retaliation against the new French operation in the Black Sea to plan and direct drone and missile attacks against Russian shipping at sea and land targets in the Crimea. And there was more discussion of, over the week until Thursday, the military report said 100 missiles of various types and 466 uranium-2 drones had been fired. In Thursday's strike, another 90 missiles and 100 uranium-2 drones were launched and hit 17 key objects of the military industry by Ukraine. And then a map was shown of all of the November 17th strikes across the Ukraine of drones and missiles. I mean, there were strikes everywhere,
Hmm.
just everywhere. And that was very striking. Oh, by the way, this article was by John Helmer, originally published at johnhelmer.net. But, okay, a NATO veteran was talking about the strikes that was centered around Rivne, and tells us that the situations around the Rivne nuclear power plant were targeted. The power outages, were widespread. And there's a long discussion of how things at the power plant by these strikes could be reduced to slag.
Yeah, it's bad.
Yes.
That seems to be the new way of fighting. Using power outages.
Yes. Yes, it is. At least the latest thing the Russians are trying to do. They did it actually limited amount, but now they're getting really serious about it. And the reason why they're getting really serious about it is they're trying to knock Ukrainians out of the war before Trump appears as president. They're trying to end this war now.
Mm-hmm.
Over the next month, there are going to be serious attacks both on the grounds, and in the air. And I think they're trying to decapitate, the leadership up in Ukraine in order to, end all the resistance. I do want to quote the final paragraph of this article. Terms of the non-nuclear deterrent which the General Staff and the Kremlin have available, the electric war ranks on top. It's the non-nuclear option. The Russian weaponry does not have to be as technically advanced as the Oreshnik in order to destroy the Ukrainian power grid infrastructure, which in its vertically integrated structure is extremely vulnerable. Truly, there is no way to protect the state from this kind of attack, and recovery will take years. What happens in the meantime? Well, that's the rainy day Putin has just mentioned. And tomorrow, the forecast for Kyiv is rain, which hints at there's going to be an Oreshnik attack on Kyiv to knock out the decision-making centers, of Ukraine. And that may just by itself result in military chaos and ending of the war. This piece was republished from Dances with Bears, which I think is the blog of John Helmer, and it's by permission of the author or representative. So I think that was a really terrific article. I'll now bring up the second of our articles. Before we look for comments, that was a piece from Mondo Ice. It was a hell of a piece discussing the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a lengthy piece. It takes quite a long time to read. It's by Mitchell Plitnick. But he outlines the terms of the agreement. There were bullet points. The text of the ceasefire calls for the fighting between Hezbollah and Israel to stop immediately. Hezbollah, though, was not a party to the agreement. In other words, they didn't sign any such agreement. So it calls for Hezbollah to stop and Israel to stop. But this was an agreement, that was made between the Israelis and Lebanon, not between the Israelis and Hezbollah. Got to emphasize that. Over the course of the next 60 days, Hezbollah will move all of its personnel and equipment north of the Litani River, some 18 miles from the border with Israel, and Israel's forces will fully withdraw from Lebanon. And Dee and I earlier talked about how problematic this is.
Yes.
Hezbollah to move because Hezbollah has all that infrastructure built, all the tunnel infrastructure built south of the Litani River. That infrastructure is a tremendous investment over decades by Hezbollah. We do not think Hezbollah is going to give up this infrastructure and move all its personnel and equipment up north of the Litani River so the Israelis can move in and destroy the infrastructure. And we don't think that's going to happen. Of course, the next bullet point says the Hezbollah forces will be replaced by Lebanese military, which will operate alongside of the UNIFIL team. But anyway, we think these groups will be more favorable to Israel than to Hezbollah, though it's not clear in terms of the Lebanese army, because we know the personnel inside of the Lebanese army will likely to be friendly to Hezbollah. And maybe even the regulars in the Lebanese army will be fairly friendly to Hezbollah. At least they'll feel uncomfortable in working against Hezbollah. But they'll be responsible for ensuring no weapons or military materiel reaches Hezbollah, and that all of Hezbollah's forces and equipment are dismantled or removed from the area. I don't think Hezbollah is going to allow that. I don't think it's possible. And we critique that as Dee was reading it, because it didn't seem plausible to us. But according to the agreement, Israel, Lebanon, the United States, and France will form a mechanism, quote, group, which will work with UNIFIL to monitor and ensure enforcement of the commitments made by both sides. Yeah, we don't think that's going to happen either. I mean, they may form that group, but we think as they're forming it, there's going to be violations by the Israelis. And once the Israeli violations take place, we think that Hezbollah is going to say, hey, we're not withdrawing north of the Litani area, okay, until these ceasefire violations from Israel stop. And Israel's not going to stop its ceasefire violations. It specializes in ceasefire violations. So we don't think that's going to happen. Okay, U.S. and UN are supposed to facilitate negotiations between Israel and Lebanon to settle the remaining border disputes between the two countries. We don't think that is very useful because Hezbollah is just not a party to this agreement. And if Israel and Lebanon settle on some settlement of the border disputes, and let's say Lebanon agrees to leave the Sheba farms, okay, in the hands of the Israelis, there's no way Hezbollah is going to accept that.
Hell to the no.
No way at all. That they've been fighting for 20 years to get Israel out of the Sheba farms. They're not going to agree to anything that leaves them in there. That's not going to happen. Then there's this crazy side letter from the U.S. to Israel affirming American support for Israel to act in self-defense, a term Israel has historically stretched beyond all recognition. This was the Joe Biden administration's way of satisfying both Israel's demand that it be allowed to act against Hezbollah if it felt the need, and Lebanon's refusal to compromise its own sovereignty in such an agreement. But this is bullshit, because if Israel fails the need and acts against Hezbollah, Hezbollah is going to reply to Israel. Now, this ceasefire doesn't address the two main parties. It's a fiction, because the two main parties are not actually Lebanon and Israel. They're Hezbollah and Israel. And what Israel has been doing is attacking Lebanon to try to leverage Hezbollah stopping its attacks on Israel because of Israel's attacks on Gaza. So that's basically what that was about. So neither Lebanon nor Hezbollah were involved in the side letter, so they don't necessarily agree with its contents.
That's it. It makes no sense, the whole thing. The only thing is, it looks like a reprieve for a while.
Yeah.
The people in Lebanon and I guess in Israel, but it doesn't
Okay,
hold
Mitchell
water.
goes into a lengthy discussion of why the two agreed with it, uh, of why Hezbollah has agreed to the ceasefire, or at least is maintaining the ceasefire. And, uh, he talks about the significant damage that had been done to Hezbollah, over a period of time. Uh, he talks about the civilian toll on Lebanon, exerting pressure on Hezbollah to stop because the civilian toll uh, 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 was very heavy, and Hezbollah is part of Lebanon civil society. It doesn't really stand apart from Lebanon. Its relationships to Lebanon civil society and to the Lebanese government are very complex. It's a political force inside, of Lebanon. So they felt a responsibility for the civilian toll on the country. Basically, Israel was using the Lebanese civilians as uh, as hostages they would kill to try to get Hezbollah to stop attacking them for the genocide in Gaza. So the discussion goes on here to talk about successful decoupling of Hezbollah from Gaza by the negotiations and by the ceasefire. But that is really debatable. It seems so for now. But let me read from the part that's relevant for there. Hezbollah pledged to maintain solidarity with Hamas. They managed to do so for a year, but under the relentless onslaught from Israel and the extensive killing of Lebanese civilians, it was eventually forced to allow the genocide in Gaza to be de-linked from the fighting in the north and pursue its own ceasefire deal. And Mitchell Plitnick explains why Hezbollah agreed to this. Hezbollah lost much of its top leadership and many of its operatives. Its arms supply has been significantly diminished, and Israel's operations in both Lebanon and Syria have made resupply from Iran considerably more difficult. Ultimately, it ended up agreeing to a ceasefire that, whether directly in its text or indirectly in the side letter from the U.S. to Israel, was basically on Israel's terms. Hezbollah once again proved that despite all the devastation and slaughter Israel brought to bear, it can not only survive but still prevent an Israeli ground invasion. On that basis, they can claim victory if they want, but it's hard to make that case if we really look at the overall balance of outcomes. Israel, too, is claiming victory, but a realistic look throws that claim into doubt. Ultimately, for all the blood it spilled and all the infrastructure destroyed, Hezbollah is still standing. It's damaged, but will likely recover from that the damage. I argued that it would not easily recover if it abandoned the infrastructure it developed over so many years south of the Litani River. The infrastructure in the tunnels, the underground infrastructure that made it invulnerable to the Israelis. In other words, the people fighting in those tunnels were invulnerable to the Israelis. The Israelis did them very little damage. The Israelis' damage was through the pager attacks, through the great bomb they used to penetrate 14 stories of going underground of a residential building until they finally got to the level that where the top brass of Hezbollah was meeting, and they killed them all, of course. And that was a very, very successful attack, on the leadership. And then there are the attacks on the civilians who were basically undefended because they didn't have any Russian air defense systems yet. And so they successfully killed perhaps 3,700 civilians. So those were the Israeli victories in it. But on the other hand, ground penetration of Lebanon by the Israelis was totally unsuccessful, worse than in 2006, much worse than in 2006. They were beaten back at every turn. And meanwhile, Hezbollah was devastating Israel with attacks on the northern part of Israel and Haifa, Tel Aviv, even central Israel, being devastated. Hezbollah, with its air attacks, was being very, very successful, and Israel was in chaos. So it doesn't look like this agreement is enforceable by the Lebanese armed forces and by also, the UNIFIL armed forces. They're not going to be successful in doing this. And Netanyahu is going to violate it in a few days anyway, and that's going to bring the whole thing down. Anyway, there was a discussion here of was there a Trump influence? Supposedly, Trump communicated clearly to Netanyahu that he wanted the fighting to end. Okay, but Netanyahu can't really end, this fighting by himself, because he's not going to end the genocide in Gaza. That's going to go on. And as long as that goes on, sooner or later, Hezbollah is going to be back. And it's going to be back in spades. Even if there's a respite here, what that respite will be for, from the Hezbollah point of view, is maybe to send some people over to Syria, to decimate the threat from the Islamic extremists in Syria, currently being supported by the CIA. In other words, what's going on in the Aleppo area, of Syria, Hezbollah will do what it previously did, will help the Syrian government to clear the extremists out, and then the Hezbollah soldiers will come back to Palestine. And that's probably not going to take too long a time. But what they're doing there also is they're clearing the way for resupply by Iran to Hezbollah. They want to be resupplied, with more advanced rockets. And who knows what's going to happen when they get those rockets. And they use those rockets. But in the meantime, who knows what's going to happen when we see the Iranian retaliation for the October 26th attack by Israel. The Iranians have been promising that for a long time, and based on our sources, Badi and I think that there will be this retaliation coming in just a few days now, and it will be very severe for Israel. The Iranians, of course, are not bound by the ceasefire agreement. It is said by some people, the New York Times in particular, that the Iranians are going to think the ceasefire applies to them. I think the New York Times is totally wrong about this. I mean, there may be some debate going on inside of Iran about this, but I think Iran has to retaliate. In order to keep their credibility, they have to retaliate for the October 26th attack. So I think Dee and I both think that's going to happen in the next few days. So watch, for our prediction to come through. When that happens, it's going to be a serious attack between 1,000 and 2,000 missiles, on Israel. And in fact, I think we both think that in the face of that, it's very unlikely that Hezbollah will actually accept the ceasefire. If the Iranians attack with that kind of missile attack, I think once it's over, Hezbollah is going to chip in with another 500 missiles of its own. It's got those missiles. It has enough stocks. It's still got hundreds of thousands of flying objects left, and it's going to use at least 500 of them to supplement what the Iranians are doing. The Israelis can also expect attack from the Iraqi resistance, and they can also expect an attack from the Houthis. At the same time, it's going to be chaos in Israel. That's what we think is going to happen. Now, the third article, before people began to arrive in bulk, was the Pepe Escobar piece on how Russia and China are rewiring the mythology of Greece. Because here is Zeus. He sees Russia in the person of Putin revamping the role of Zeus, while China is revamping the role of Hermes. So what does he mean by that? Well, Zeus was the king of the gods, of course, and he was firing his thunderbolts all over the place. And so Pepe thinks that Putin will be firing his own thunderbolts in the form of the Oreshnik, a seemingly harmless hazelnut tree. And Pepe then goes back to Newton, and he discusses the impact of warheads traveling at 1,200 meters per second in terms of what they can do to concrete, impact shocks turning whatever is ahead into gas. A kinetic shock wave pops up as deep as 50 meters underground, swarming the deep underground and crushing, destroying, actually imploding everything in its wake. In its wake. He thinks that's what's happened to the Yuzmesh plant, in Dnipropetrovsk. And he goes on to discuss the missile systems. He quotes Putin about the Russian Iskander missile system. It's worth repeating that quote. It's a great quote. Okay, Putin is boasting here, but I think he has a right to boast. But he says, quote, the Russian Iskander missile system and its modifications represent the Russian analog of all three ATACMS, all three of the modifications of the ATACMS missile system. The warhead weight and TNT equivalent is about the same, but Iskander has a longer range. Okay, the new U.S.-made PRSM missile is not superior to its Russian counterparts in any specification. The Storm Shadow air-launched missile, the French Scalp, and the German Taurus have a warhead weighing 450 to 480 kilograms in TNT equivalent and a range of 500 to 650 kilometers. The German Taurus has a range of 650 kilometers. The KH-101 air-launched missile is the Russian analog of these systems, which is comparable in terms of the power of the warhead, but significantly exceeds each of the European-made systems in terms of range. The new U.S.-made PRSM systems, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the JASSM, which has been talked about a lot. Hey, send JASSMs to Ukraine. No, they're inferior to their Russian counterparts in terms of technical specifications. Without a doubt, we are aware of the number of the relevant weapon systems that are in service of our potential adversaries, says Putin. We know how many of them are kept in storage facilities. We know their exact location, how many weapons have been supplied to Ukraine, and how many more are planned to be supplied. As far as the production of relevant missile systems and relevant equipment is concerned, Russia has 10 times more of them than the combined output of all NATO countries. Next year, we will increase the production by another 25 to 30%. We can see that the Kyiv regime ringleaders are begging their masters for military equipment of a different kind. Let no one forget about the Caliber, Kinjal, and Zircon hypersonic missile systems, which are unmatched around the world in terms of their technical specifications. Their production is also being ramped up and is going at full speed. More such products may show up shortly on our menu of the products of this class, if I may put it that way. As they say, customer satisfaction is guaranteed, quips President Putin. Then the article talks about a meteorite collision ahead, because the Oreshnik is like a meteor when it strikes. And okay, there's a quote from Putin who says, "We know from history what meteorites fell where and what the consequences were." God, screwed that up, didn't I? Here. What the consequences were. Sometimes it was enough to form entire lakes. So, then a man by the name of Mikhail Kovalchuk, the actual creator of these seemingly innocent hazelnuts, to post everything replica of the thunderbolts of Zeus, told Izvestia on the sidelines of the 4th Congress of Young Scientists in the federal territory of Sirius, which Lana tells us is close to Georgia. Kovalchuk is the president of the Kurchatov Institute National Research Center. Essentially, he remarked how, quote, the materials Russia has can withstand ultra-high temperatures, made it possible to create the Oreshnik system, and will make it possible to create other types of hypersonic weapons, unquote. There's then talk about how the materials are being worked on for those types of systems, for hypersonics. The materials in them used to work at 1,500 degrees, then at 1,800, these at 2,000, and we did it while others did not, says Kovalchuk. And he says the next step should be materials that can withstand 2,500 to 3,000 degrees of temperature. Honey, you're making too much noise there. Stop. That would make it possible, for instance, missiles flying at very low altitudes at Mach 15 or even Mach 20, creating even more utterly devastating impact, including plasma shock, than the already tested Oreshnik. And anyway, there's that kind of technical discussion, the possibility of a plasma shock. It's very visionary. And then the next part is about, as Russia revamping the role of Zeus, China is busy revamping the role of Hermes. And that's how Beijing is now selling US dollar bonds in Saudi Arabia. And they're selling these bonds to the Arabs in return for the US dollars of the Arabs, I guess, which they're then going to divert to Belt and Road Initiative partner nations as loans. So they're able to repay their extortion-style debts to the hegemon-controlled IMF and the World Bank. I thought that was very, very clever way of doing things in order to get the hegemon repaid. The best part is that these BRI partners can repay these dollar loans to China using what else? The yuan, as well as the merchandise they produce or their natural resources. So Pepe views this as a de-dollarization highway, a fast de-dollarization highway. I think he's right. Brilliant about that. But then he says, and no one should ever forget, China, U.S. dollar bonds are backed by gold, while U.S. dollar bonds are backed by. There I had to add that what Pepe doesn't understand is that China U.S. dollar bonds have to be backed by Chinese gold, because China is not the issuer of U.S. dollars, but the U.S. dollar bonds only have to be backed by our ability to create dollars, because we can always guarantee repayment of the dollar bonds with interest. Simple as that. That understanding seems to have missed Pepe. Anyway, assorted Western blah, blah, blah about heavily indebted China is nonsense. China's avowedly huge debt is overwhelmingly domestic debt in yuan. Here I pointed out that, yes, it's domestic debt in yuan, and China issues the yuan, so it can always repay all its domestic debt. And that's really good. So, but the point is correct that China uses its internal bond market to help companies invest their money and earn a decent return with virtually no risk. There is no risk because China can always create new yuan. And they can do all that while stimulating the economy, as Pepe says. Okay, so Pepe says that this is what China's maximum soft power is all about. It's turning into a front to borrow cheap U.S. dollars for the global South. Then he says, what will happen to those U.S. dollars repaid by the global South? And he says there's going to be excess liquidity going back into the United States, plunging the U.S. into another inflation crisis. Stock markets will boom, but interest rates will go up, making borrowing even more expensive. And I pointed out that depends on who's the head of the Federal Reserve. If we get someone in there who believes in zero interest rate policy, then borrowing is not going to get any more expensive. That's not going to contribute to the inflation crisis. And of course, it will be possible to stem the inflation crisis, okay, even with the liquidity excess, okay, in dollars, by seeing to it that prices and wages are regulated and that price gouging stops. I didn't say that before, but I'm saying that now. Okay, anyway, Pepe points out that if you couple the inflation crisis with high tariffs, and as wily Hong Kong trader put it, it's a perfect storm, the baby, unquote. And that was a very insightful comment. Yes, it might be a perfect storm, but that perfect storm can be contained by proper fiscal policy and regulatory policy here in the United States. Now, whether we're going to get that under Trump or not, that's another matter. Okay. But if we can teach Trump some MMT, maybe he will be able to get that, and we can actually get that contained. Then Pepe says, so welcome to China, playing Hermes, son of Zeus, and the gorgeous Pleiad by the name of Maya. Hermes, among his endless attributes, is the god of travelers, roads, and trade, BRI, connectivity corridors. This is such a clever blog by Pepe. Cunning, diplomacy, language, writing, and astrology. So Hermes is Pepe's god because he's the god of travelers, roads, and trade, and Pepe is a traveler par excellence, totally immersed in roads and trade, the BRI initiative. He's cunning, he's all for diplomacy, and he's all about language and writing. I don't know if he's about astrology, but I'll bet he knows something about astrology too. The herald and personal messenger of Zeus, Hermes also happens to be a divine trickster. Now buy those US dollars in Saudi Arabia from me, says China. And then he says, once again, here we see Russia playing chess, thinking several moves ahead, while China's playing Go, also thinking several moves ahead. and the partnership all along in sync is spawning a lovely mythology revival of Greek mythology. The Hazel Thunderbolts have rendered dead on arrival the entire hegemon gambit against Russia. Bye-bye, quote, strategic advantage acquired by provoking Moscow to strike with tactical nuclear weapons. Now Russia can strike anywhere, anytime at 12,000 kilometers per hour with no radiation involved and no pileup of civilian casualties. Talk about a kinetic shockwave, both military and geopolitical. No wonder NATO-Stan is clueless. Zeus oversees the chessboard from up there with a smirk, by the way, which he did in his news conference, drinking a cool bottle of Brunello, which is an Italian red wine I learned earlier today that sells for $3,995 here in the United States. At least one of the reserve bottles sells for $3,995. I guess Trump can afford to drink that, but I can't. So there is that. And those were the three articles we went over before the explosion of attendance, which, by the way, has continued to explode. We are now at 98 folks, according to our indicator up here, and that usually is an underestimate, so I'm sure we're way over 100. And Lana says maybe go over the first one. I did. And John B. says, Pepe, now Beijing came up with a brilliant idea of issuing bonds in U.S. dollars. China's merely selling China-held U.S. bonds to BR nations at a discount. I don't know if they're selling the bonds at a discount, but they're discounting the interest to only whatever the Federal Reserve interest is at the time, whatever the bond interest is at the time. What Pepe cited was 5% interest, but by the time some of those bonds are sold, the interest might be down to 2% or 1%, maybe even less. Okay. So that's what I have to say about that. D, any more comments?
So you pretty much went over what is happening for people to be aware of.
Yeah.
When you look at the picture of everything.
Okay, I think I did. Do you want to add anything?
I just want to add the point about this being using the electricity, the power outages, as a way of, I don't know.
Okay, it's a way of collapsing Ukraine.
Yes. Now also, Putin, collapsing Ukraine and message to NATO and the U.S. They could do that wherever they choose to.
And they will do that, wherever they choose to, leaving a societal wreck for the West, to rebuild, even if they get to stay in a part of Ukraine. And I guess the article is pointing out it might take actually 10 years to rebuild the electricity infrastructure in Ukraine if they go on with these attacks. But they might not go on with these attacks. If the next attack is on the decision-making centers at Kiev, that may collapse the whole structure. Okay, there are now desertions in the armed forces that are very heavy. Obviously, the military effort is collapsing, both in Kursk, and inside of Ukraine, itself. It can't be more than a matter of week or two before the Kursk is completely cleared up. And I think now an attack on the decision-making centers in Kiev, on Bankova Street, with an Oreshnik missile, may collapse the government entirely, allowing Russia to actually set up a government with its own people who are favorable to Russia, and then Russia constructs a peace treaty with them. Something like that could very easily be done. I don't know where Zelensky is going to be, but uh, okay, if he stays there for the Oreshnik attack, I expect he will be no more. Uh, if he flees, well, he might set up a government in exile in Poland, but depending on how things go, he has no claim to legitimacy anymore because he didn't hold an election. So right now he's the illegal president of Ukraine. So if he goes and sets the government in exile, I mean, why is that government, going to have any credibility? I don't think it will. I don't think it'll have as much credibility as a puppet government that's set up by the Russians, and that's getting very liberal Russian help in order to rebuild the whole of Ukraine. I mean, I think that could well be in the future. We could see it beginning before Trump takes office. But we will see. We will definitely see.
Yeah, because this keeps going around with Zelensky offering, a deal, whatever, but it's not what Russia wants.
Oh, Zelensky's deals are ridiculous. He said
Exactly.
he's willing to trade some territory, but first he wants certain conditions met. He's not in any position to suggest do anything but unconditional surrender.
Exactly.
I mean, if he wants to live tomorrow morning, he needs to get up. He needs to call Putin and he needs to say, Ukraine unconditionally surrenders. What do you want me to do from here on in?
No, he tries to act like he still has this power. And he's trying and actually making the claim, about an opportunity to be a part of, NATO. And it's not happening.
It's never going to happen. Russia will never allow it to happen. Okay, it's dominant when it comes to nuclear arms right now. It's dominant when it comes to conventional arms. Even more dominant, now that it has the Oreshnik. I mean, it's over. It's over. The West has to go back and rebuild.
The West doesn't seem to get it.
They don't
You
seem
know,
to get it. Yeah, they don't seem to get it. If Putin wanted to, he could come up in a year or a year and a half with the capability to conquer all of Europe. He doesn't have that capability now because he doesn't have an army that is large enough. And I don't think he wants to bid one because he doesn't care about running the whole of Europe. He do business with Eurasia and with China
exactly.
to build up prosperity in that area. So he's not going to do it. But from the standpoint of Europe, they don't have uh, uh, their military capability is only enough to do pinpricks right now unless they go nuclear. And I think if they even hint at going nuclear, then Russia is going to Oreshnik them to death within a very few weeks, and they will no longer have the capacity to go nuclear. I don't think they realize that that capability is there, okay, in Russia, and we can't really protect them, from that. I don't think Trump is going to protect them. I don't think he's going to have a nuclear war with Russia in order to protect Europe.
No, you wouldn't.
So what Europe should do is sue for peace with Putin. They could easily get a peace agreement, with Putin, who would restore the shipments of oil to them and create prosperity in Germany once again and in Western Europe. He'd be happy to do business with them. I mean, why not?
I know, because they're all at a loss.
Yeah. I mean, right now that they've been destroying their whole apple cart. He can build up the apple cart for them. I mean, I'm sure he'd just love to do that because that would free him to do all the business he wants in Eurasia and the rest of the world and build up Russia, peace, prosperity, its population. I mean, in a very few years, it could be a world-class nation. I mean, many people would argue he's a world-class nation now. I don't mean to insult it, but I mean in terms of the total prosperity of the population.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, 10 years from now, they could have the prosperity that Europe has enjoyed for a very long time now.
Yes, and what Europe and the USA don't get is that China and Russia, with BRICS, they're looking, there's resources, there's business dealings elsewhere.
And there's more prosperity potentially than even exists now in the United States and Canada and and Europe.
Right. And here we have Trump making that claim about with with the de-dollarization, talking about China and saying we'll put 100% tariff on China. And it's like, are you crazy? You don't realize China really doesn't need us.
Yes, I know. There's that uh, um, uh, statistic that right now our trade with China represents 3% of their GDP. They could replace that 3% with trade with other countries inside of a year,
Yeah,
just as Russia replaced its trade with the West inside of a year when we totally cut off trade with them. It was easy for them to compensate for the loss in trade because it wasn't that big a part of their GDP. And China's even in a better position to do that.
exactly. So I thought, Trump, you didn't make any sense with that.
No, he doesn't understand.
No.
He just doesn't really he doesn't understand the economics of it. I'm afraid he doesn't understand either the military part of it, but I think he's probably more capable of understanding the military disadvantages which the U.S. has, as opposed to the economic disadvantages which the U.S. has. Trump tweeted put 100% tariff on all BRICS nations that won't trade, in USDs. I don't think he understands. BRICS nations are not saying they're not going to trade in USDs. In other words, if the United States wants to trade with them, in USDs, they will trade with the United States in US dollars. I don't think the BRICS nations have any problems about that, but they're not going to do all their trade in US dollars. If other nations want to trade with them in other currencies, they're willing to use other currencies, local currencies. And they're willing to use also uh, um, 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 uh, the ruble, and the renminbi. And I don't think there's any way Trump can stop that. And if he wants to put 100% tariff on all nations that are also trading in those currencies, then those nations will just cut off trade with the United States. That's all. Has he considered What do these other nations need trade with the United States for? Has he considered, do they need trade with the United States more than they need trade with Russia and China?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right now, it must be obvious to every nation in the world that China is a more important trading nation, than the United States is. I think that's plain to everybody right now. I think the statistics actually show that China is the leading trading partner of more nations, than the United States is.
Mm-hmm.
I think the United States thinks that because 800 bases all over the world, that means they're the leading trading partner of all these other nations, but that's not true. We are not. China is the leading trading partner of all these nations. It's becoming the leading trading partner even of Latin American nations. I mean, that new port it built, in Peru. At this point, the Brazilians are building a rail system to the new port. I mean, that's going to be incredible. Then there's going to be shipping from the new port in Peru directly to Shanghai. I mean, come on. All of South America is going to connect up to the new port so it can directly ship to Shanghai. It's going to be incredible what's going to happen. And Trump, in trying to coerce other nations to stop doing what there's a natural inclination to do, all he's going to do is accelerate the move away from the United States towards the BRICS countries. Trump has to read some, geopolitics. There's a reason why the geopolitics people say that it's necessary for the United States or Britain to stop one coalition from dominating the world island. The world island is Eurasia, you know. Yeah, we have driven the Russians and Chinese together. And together, the coalition of Russia, Iran, and China is going to dominate the world island. They'll pick up Turkey somewhere along the way, too. And there's nothing we can do about that anymore. We did it ourselves because we did the kinds of negative things that Trump is contemplating right now. Okay, D, any more discussion?
I think that just covers it, and we just don't learn. We don't learn to play nice, as they say in the sandbox.
It's because we don't elect the right people, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't elect the right people because the donors are controlling, okay, the frickin' system. There are people who know how to manage this particular transition. We see them on television. I shouldn't say on television. We see them on YouTube all the time. We see them on Rumble all the time. They're out there. They know what to do. But none of them can be president because of the donors. We need to get rid of the effing donors.
That's the problem.
We need to get them out of there so they have no influence on the political system. Anyway, on that note, maybe it's time to say goodnight.
Yes, it's time to say goodnight. Thank you, Joe, for a good show. Excellent show. Covered a lot.
Thank you, Dee, for a very good show, too.
And good night, Bonnie.
Good night. Good show.
Okay, good night, Dee, and good night, everybody. And I will be back on Tuesday. If not before them, I may be on one of these shows before them, but certainly be back on Tuesday at 9 p.m. If the proverbial creeks don't rise.
Sounds about right.
Okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.
And good night, folks.